There is a killer in this cast, and someone on this stage is about to die.
Oh my God.
Hartford 901, what's your emergency?
It looks like strangulation marks.
An imposter on the prowl.
He is able to present himself to the world in a very different light than the way he actually is.
Acting on evil.
He staged her body.
A real-life thriller as twisted as any drama.
You've got one woman who's been attacked and another woman who's dead.
A lot of dark stuff.
And when the plot finally unravels,
Right when I saw his face, I'm like, yeah.
the suspect at the center
We told him, you have the wrong guy.
will leave a community stunned and several families torn apart.
No remorse, no compassion.
No, honey, no.
I've interviewed killers before. He's at a different level.
This was Jessie Blodgett, the essence of who she was, and on most days, how you'd find her.
Every time I would go over to her house, she'd be playing the piano. Even when I was trying to talk to her, she would be playing the piano, and I'd be like, I'm trying to talk to you. You know, she was always singing, always dancing.
And as both a public performer and a music tutor for local kids, Jessie was something of a star in the small town of Hartford, Wisconsin.
What was she like as a little girl?
She was brilliant. In first grade, the teacher created her own curriculum for Jessie, and when the class's spelling words were and the, Jessie's first one was metamorphosis, an anesthesiologist.
A brilliant mind that Jessie would use to pursue many passions as she grew, from fighting for animal rights to advocating against violence towards women. But in the end, it always came back to music.
We actually wrote some songs together. She was just brilliant at writing music.
But Jessie wasn't the only exceptional talent to come out of Hartford. Enter her good friend and classmate, Dan Bartelt.
Dan and Jess sat next to each other every day in school, all through high school. Dan was a gifted violinist. He was first chair and Jess was second chair.
Dan was hilarious. You know, I always thought he was the funny, really outgoing, always making jokes. He was also very smart. I kind of admired their friendship.
Jessie and Dan also had a shared love for the stage, and on paper, they had all the makings of an arts-loving power couple, but they tried that. Didn't work.
They dated for about 3 or 4 months, freshman year of high school. They broke up.
But Dan is the one who broke it off. Why?
I don't know. We thought that he's a freshman in high school. He doesn't need to explain himself why he's not committed for life here.
And anyway, they were better as friends. After high school, Jessie and Dan went away to different colleges, but they reconnected the following summer.
Jess came home one day and said, Dad, Mom, Dan's back. He dropped out of college. He's a straight-A student. What's up with that?
I know that they became really close when he had dropped out of college. They would play music together all the time. They were collaborating.
The two even wrote and recorded this song together, which now serves as something of a time capsule. Just a few weeks after posting that tune on YouTube, Jessie and Dan would be in the spotlight for separate but equal reasons. Dan landed a starring role in Bye Bye Birdie, and Jessie?
Jessie was the fiddler in Fiddler on the Roof.
Here she is playing for a packed house on opening weekend. These last few notes, Jessie's swan song.
That was her last night on Earth.
Just hours after curtain call, Jessie is seen here at the cast party, her smile apparently betraying some very uneasy feelings. Issues that had to do with at least 2 older men in attendance. Later that night, technically early the next morning, July 15th, Jessie returns home and runs into her mom. The two talk about that party.
They talked about 2 of the people at the cast party were kind of flirting with her.
She even put those feelings down in her diary that same night, writing in part, "I think I'm being corrupted. I think certain men are taking what should be platonic love and perverting it into a competition." But Jessie also goes on to write, "I am not helpless. I will recognize problems and confront them without fear. God be with me."
And then she went to bed.
Yes.
Around 8 the next morning, Jessie's mom, Joy, dropped some laundry off in Jessie's room before heading to work. Jessie's dad had already left for the day.
Jessie was asleep in her bed and everything was fine.
4 hours after that, Jessie's mom returned home for her lunch break. The house was quiet.
Joyce just thought she was sleeping in. She was a teenager on break.
But when she went to wake her daughter,
She was mad that Jess wasn't answering her. She went into Jessie's room. She couldn't understand why she wasn't responding. And then she touched her and Jessie was cold.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Hartford 911, what's your emergency?
My daughter is blue. I went to wake her up, and I just got home for lunch, and she won't wake up.
She's
oh
19.
my God.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Okay.
Okay, so is she breathing?
I don't think so, no.
Jessie is unresponsive, covered up in her own bed.
Okay, ma'am, do you know how to do CPR?
Jessie.
Do you know how to do CPR, ma'am?
She's cold. She's cold.
She's cold.
She's cold. Oh my God.
You can hear the anguish in her voice as she tries to process the scene and especially what she sees next.
Oh my gosh, she's good.
Okay.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
She rolled her over and she saw ligature marks.
Her pants are all wet and she's got, it looks like strangulation marks.
There are strangulation marks?
That's what it looks like. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on.
After that, the dispatcher puts Joy on hold while she alerts EMS. Sadly, it's already too late.
Honey, what happened to you? No. No. Honey, no. No.
That's how we found her, dead.
She was just 19 years old. Blodgett was at work the Monday his wife found their only child, Jessie, apparently strangled to death in her bedroom.
She just seems so gone. She's so gone.
By the time Buck returned home, investigators already had his daughter cordoned off.
Did you know that she's been murdered in her own bed?
They wouldn't let me upstairs, so I couldn't see her. I couldn't touch her. I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't tell her I loved her. And I couldn't tell her I was sorry for not being there when she needed her dad. And I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
Detective Richard Thickens of the Hartford PD was one of the first investigators on the scene that day.
What did you find?
We found Jessie on the floor, very obvious mark on her neck, and marks on her wrist, very faint marks that could possibly have been binding marks. At that point, I believe we had a homicide on our hands.
Jessie's mom also tells detectives that when she found her daughter, her hair and clothes were wet, a sign the killer may have spent extra time with his victim.
He staged her body. I believed he washed her body and then placed it back in the bed, covered her up.
Did you think it was someone who knew the victim, or did you think that this was a random act of violence?
There was no signs of forced entry, so it led us to believe that it was somebody that knew the house.
But who knew Jessie's movements so intimately, and who would use that knowledge to end her life? Police didn't have to look far to find their first suspects.
Jessie had been in a play that had wrapped up a Sunday night, and afterwards she had gone to a cast party, and Jessie had talked about some concerns she had about other people involved in the cast.
Concerns she wrote about in her journal on the day she died.
Her own diary is telling you that there is an older man who's been bothering her, and you start looking at him.
Absolutely.
What did you find?
We found that there were some concerns with his actions at the cast party. He had actually pulled her onto his lap, according to one of her friends.
And on the day Jess was killed,
He hadn't shown up for work on Monday, which for us was a significant concern.
but police say he cooperated with the investigation, and after talking to the man for a few hours,
We cleared him pretty quickly.
detectives also cleared the other man Jessie wrote about in her diary.
What are you narrowing down on?
To someone that knew her activity and knew where she'd be.
What cops in Hartford didn't realize was that authorities in the neighboring town of Richfield were already zeroing in on the suspect, but for an entirely different reason, an entirely different attack on an entirely different victim.
Okay, and how was he holding it?
It happened 3 days before Jessie's murder. A young woman named Melissa Etzler was walking her dog at a local park when she was tackled from behind by a man with a knife. Washington County Detective Joel Clausing interviewed Melissa in the hospital shortly after the assault, her emotions still raw as her wounds from fighting off the attacker.
All right, this is Detective Clausing. It is July 12th.
Sorry.
Do you need me to stop?
And so what was her story?
Well, I got down to the hospital and I started talking to her, and she couldn't write because her hand was all cut up. So I got a recorded statement.
Melissa tells Detective Clausing she was just getting ready to leave the park that morning when she's startled by the sound of footsteps behind her.
So I looked back and I laughed and said, "Oh, you scared me." Just because I thought he was some friendly guy. And then I turn around again because I can hear him coming at me, and I see a knife in his hand.
Melissa continues her story a few days later when police take her back to that park to reenact the crime.
Take another step. Yeah.
This is how far away you were when you first saw it. Okay? Then you turn around. Then
You got a step closer. You got the knife in his right hand.
After that, Melissa says it was fight back or die.
Next thing I remember, I'm on the ground. He's on top of me. I'm stomach down. I'm holding onto the knife. We were fighting for it. I had the blade, and that's how I got cut. That's when he said, "Can I just go?"
He said something weird to her.
after she disarmed him, he asked if he could leave. and I believe she said no.
When he tried taking it from me, I said no. Like, you're gonna go, I'm taking this with me.
And as Melissa tells us, that's exactly what she did.
Oh, I kept the knife. Yeah, that was in my car. It was a fish fillet knife.
Wow, so you kept the knife.
Right.
Is that when he said, "Can I go?"
He can't get it from me. He's trying, but he just can't get it out of my grip. So he finally is just like, "Can I just go?" And it's like, well, you're the one on top of me, so.
You're the one who attacked me. What are you doing?
Exactly. So it was just bizarre.
She says after that, the suspect ran off, but that she remembered every detail of her perpetrator.
I can still see it in my head right now, what he was wearing.
A white male, 18 to 20 years of age, 6'2", 210 pounds.
Yep.
He had light blonde hair with very fair skin.
Yes.
Okay, and you said he had checkered shorts?
Mm-hmm. Plaid shorts.
Melissa was the best witness I've ever had in my entire career. She described where he was parked in the parking lot and what kind of vehicle he was driving to within a couple of years.
Dark blue minivan, Dodge Caravan. I don't know what year. An older model, though.
Based on Melissa's description of the suspect, police released this composite sketch to the media.
We expected a bunch of calls saying, I knew who this guy was. We didn't get anything.
But when they circulate Melissa's near-perfect description of the suspect's van,
I was approached by a Deputy Meyer from our department. He came up to me and said, I saw a car like that parked in that very same spot a couple months ago. But even better, he said, I found you a plate.
How did he have the plate?
He ran it that day.
No way.
Yeah. He ran the plate that day. He knew he ran the plate that day, so he looked back on all the plates that he had run over the past how many ever weeks and found it.
And when police put a name to that plate, the focus of two mysteries in two separate towns narrows in on one very surprising suspect.
The owner didn't match the description, but then they found out that they had a son who did.
On the same day, 19-year-old actress / activist / singer-songwriter Jessie Blodgett was being murdered in her own bed. 12 miles away in the neighboring town of Richfield, Wisconsin, a woman named Melissa Etzler was walking detectives through an assault that happened to her 3 days before.
The police were still trying to find the person who attacked you.
Right.
Did you ever get a really good look at him?
I know I got a good look at his clothes and his van.
And because of that, Detective Joel Clausing of the Washington County Sheriff's Office was able to track down a license plate for the suspect's vehicle. Though to his initial dismay, it came back registered to a middle-aged couple.
We're looking for a 20-year-old kid that's 6'1", 200 pounds. We're not looking for a 45-year-old man and his wife.
But when police question that man and his wife, they find out the couple has a son, 20 years old, roughly 6'1", 200 pounds.
Mom and Dad gave us his cell phone number. As we're driving away from the residence, I called him.
Around that same time, in the town of Hartford, Jessie Blodgett's loved ones have filled her family's home.
We all sat in a circle around our living room, and people shared memories and cried together and hugged.
Among those mourners, Jessie's old artistic collaborator, fellow actor / singer-songwriter, Daniel Bartelt.
Dan actually did most of the talking. He was talking. He did a lot of talking.
And he was about to do a lot more.
Then all of a sudden he had this phone call, and I just kind of looked at him when he got this phone call, and he wasn't like upset, he wasn't surprised, and he just said, "Oh, okay, I'll be right over there." And then he hung up the phone.
On the other end of that phone, Detective Clausing. Daniel Bartelt was the son of that couple, the driver of the van.
I told him we needed to talk to him, and he said okay. And I asked him where he was. He said he was at Jessie Blodgett's vigil.
And by this time, even though it wasn't your case, you knew who Jessie Blodgett was.
Yes, but what sparked more interest, when I got off the phone, I looked at Detective Walsh and said he never even asked me what this was about. How many people get called by a detective, asked to meet, and they don't say, what's going on? Why do I need to meet you? He never said it.
And apparently he didn't have much to say to his friends back at the Blodgett house either.
We kind of looked at everyone and was like, I got called down to the police station.
Of course, at that point, no one there even knew about the attack on Melissa.
He's in our house, and Joy, this is my wife, she said, Dan, don't worry, they're gonna talk to all of Jessie's friends. And little did we know at the time why they were talking to Dan.
All right. Do you know what this is about? No. This is about an incident that Detective Walsh and I are investigating that happened last Friday. Okay.
You're questioning him only about the attack in the park, not Jessie's murder.
That's correct. I tell him, you know, I just want to talk to you about some stuff. And I said,
where were you at again?
House in Hartford, Jessie Blodgett's house.
The girl that just passed?
Yeah, we were visiting her parents.
And I said, you know, just making small talk, whatever happened with her? And he said,
I think someone raped and murdered her.
That was in the first 2 minutes of the interview, but would prove to be one of its most significant moments. More on why in a moment. But first,
I wanted to talk to him about my case, right? So we started asking him about his history.
Okay. Were you at a park last Friday?
No.
Any
I don't believe so.
Dan denies knowing anything about the assault on Melissa, but then something catches Clausing's eye.
What happened to your arm?
Where?
On your elbow.
Fell, probably.
See your hands? Go like this. That's all you fell.
Got stabbed with a screw at work.
He had an injury to his thumb, a puncture cut We asked him where he had sustained that injury, and he said he did it at work. And then Detective Walsh says,
If we check with your employer, would you still have your job? No. Okay, that's what I thought.
Did he really have a job?
no. Every day he would get up, put on his work clothes, grab his lunch, get in his van, and pretend to go to work to his parents.
But if Dan wasn't working, then his explanation for that cut wasn't either.
Then I said, well, how'd you injure your thumb then?
Tell us about that. I was cooking and I couldn't figure out a knife.
And that's when I stopped him, and I said,
Hold on a second. Let's talk. Okay, nobody in their right mind would lie about cutting themselves if it happened at home cooking. Okay? What happened? Just be honest.
And to Clausing's surprise, he suddenly was.
I've gone to the park before.
eventually he admitted that he was the one that attacked Melissa in the park.
You went after that girl, right? Yes. Okay. Why? What were you going to do? I was scared for Mom.
Dan tells detectives that since he dropped out of college, he's felt frightened of life, and he just wanted someone else to feel the same. A confession complete with motive, but then investigators didn't necessarily need it. At the park, they find Dan's blood on multiple items and a roll of heating duct tape that matches tape in Dan's house. Plus, they had their star witness.
They had me do a lineup. Right when I saw his face, I'm like, yeah, that's him, 100%.
So you had your guy,
For the attack.
and then what happens?
We gotta arrest him, but now we discussed, do you think he's the guy?
The Jessie Blodgett guy.
Correct. Do you think he's good for the murder?
And the reason they wonder that goes back to those first few minutes of the interview when Daniel Bartelt said this.
Raped and murdered.
He said, that she was raped and murdered, which was significant
Because
because the police, us, at that time didn't even know that she was sexually assaulted.
Investigators expected to find the man guilty of the brazen assault on Melissa Etzler lurking in the shadows. They figured any persons of interest in 19-year-old Jessie Blodgett's murder 12 miles away to be hiding underground. Instead, Daniel Bartelt was basking in the spotlight, even landing the lead role in Bye Bye Birdie just before both attacks.
Dan was one of the most intelligent people that I've ever interviewed. He had a sense about him that was bad.
Dan made your skin crawl.
Yes.
Especially when just one day after Jessie's murder, before the forensics had even come back, this trained actor flubbed one of his lines.
He said that he believed that Jessie had been raped and murdered.
And you didn't even know she had been raped yet.
We had no indications of her being raped.
Only the killer could know that. So while Dan sits in jail for that assault on the girl in the park, detectives covering that case share what they know with detectives investigating Jessie's murder.
I was doing search warrants on Dan's computer, and in the computer there was a lot of bondage pornography. There was a lot of, I don't know how you describe it, it's dark stuff.
Including one Wikipedia search on spree killers and several other searches for serial killers. It didn't end there.
We actually had searches for pornographic snuff films that actually seemed to match the series of events that had occurred in Jessie's room. In the movie, after strangling her, he washes her. One of the things that Mrs. Blodgett had made note of was how Jessie was placed back in her bed, covered up, and that her hair was wet.
Just an eerie coincidence? Detectives were about to ask the suspect themselves.
What I want to talk to you about, Jessie Blodgett, and understand that you are friends with her, okay?
This time, Dan is a little more careful not to incriminate himself.
What do you think happened to Jessie?
I have no idea.
Dan admits that he'd reconnected with his one-time girlfriend that summer and had been at Jessie's house a lot in the weeks before her murder. He even says he had good reason to hide that fact, but it wasn't because of anything nefarious.
Started kissing on the couch and she'd asked if I wanted to go up with her.
He said that they had a romantic relationship, but he hadn't made it public because he was dating someone else.
But detectives are suspicious.
The entire time I talked to him, he made it look like he was crying, but I didn't see him shed a tear.
It's one of those kind of cries.
Right.
A lot of noise and no tears.
Right.
As for Dan's whereabouts on the day of Jessie's murder, he says he was driving around in his parents' van pretending to be at work.
He said that he had left the house and he'd gone to a couple of different parks, ending up at Woodlawn Park in the city.
What's had you end up there? 10 or so. What were you doing about Woodlawn?
Reading, trying to write.
An airtight alibi, claims Dan. But then, get this, when it comes to what Dan was, quote, trying to write, he tells detectives it's a series of stories about a young girl, not unlike Jessie, who would eventually be murdered.
The main character's name is Jessica.
So he admits to killing off the fictional character Jessica, not so much for Jessie Blodgett.
Can you help us out on it? Give them some closure?
He denied any involvement.
And as detectives continue to press, Dan's tone gets suddenly less teary.
You're making me very uncomfortable.
Why is that?
Because of what you're trying to insinuate.
And what's that?
Dan uses his right to remain silent on that question, and he won't have much to say beyond that either.
Let's see how this is helpful. If we're going to talk more, I might tell the lawyer.
And with that statement, it was interview over. Dan had confessed to nothing. As for his alibi,
Dan said that he was at the Woodlawn Park. So they get video. Sure enough, there's Dan. He was there that morning that Jessie was killed.
that's him in the red shorts, definitely not at the scene of the crime. So then, had police been too quick to pin a murder on an easy suspect? One who had already confessed to another crime? Jessie's own parents thought so. Especially because Daniel Bartelt spent hours grieving with them after Jessie's murder. In fact,
When the police called Dan,
Dan was at our house.
was crying over Jessie.
Yeah. And sharing memories with us. I hugged Dan several times. We were telling the police it wasn't him and he was a good guy.
but Jessie's parents are wrong, fooled by his act. As it turns out, Dan's own alibi would also be his undoing. Back at that park, police uncovered the dark side of Daniel Bartelt.
They go take all the trash out of the trash bins at Woodlawn Park. They find the cereal box. Inside the cereal box is ball gag, ligatures, alcohol wipes.
And the rope found in the trash lines up perfectly with the ligature marks on Jessie's neck. Then when detectives search Dan's house, they find the exact same rope in his garage. Plus, remember that tape investigators found on Dan's vents that matched tape he dropped during Melissa's assault? Incredibly, a full week after Jessie Blodgett's murder, investigators taking a second look at the scene find the exact same tape under her bed.
His fingerprints were on that.
Pretty incredible.
Yes.
And based on the evidence, investigators believe they know exactly why the tape was there.
What did he use this tape for?
He hog-tied Jess. He gag-balled her, and he taped her so the gag ball wouldn't come out.
Detectives also find both Jessie and Dan's DNA on those ligatures, and Dan's DNA under Jessie's fingernails. And when it comes to that detail Dan let slip in his first interview,
And did he rape her?
We found DNA that indicated that he assaulted her.
after that, it was hard for anyone to deny that Daniel Bartelt they thought they knew was something else entirely.
Dan's a chameleon. He is able to present himself to the world in a very different light than the way he actually is.
Good qualities for an actor, lethal for a killer.
You want to believe the best about people. You want to believe the best about people that you call your friends. It's to You know, see your friends not be evil.
Even without a confession, Dan Bartelt is charged with first-degree intentional homicide of his old friend Jessie. But there's still one giant question left hanging. Why? Dan would get one more chance to say his piece in court, but would he finally come clean? Or would it be the ultimate slap in the face to a family already in mourning?
Mr. Bartelt, before I sentence you, anything you want to say on your behalf?
I do.
Jessie Blodgett didn't have an arch nemesis. She wasn't murdered by an angry foe. Jessie's life was taken by someone she thought was a friend.
She definitely admired Dan, you know, his musical talents, his, you know, his mind, his intelligence. She really did have a good friendship with Dan.
The two even wrote and recorded songs together just weeks before Daniel Bartelt bound Jessie as she slept, sexually assaulted her, then strangled her to death, leaving her dead in her bed for her mother to find.
Honey, what happened to you?
But the big question still remaining was why he did it.
Personally, don't like labels, but I think he's a sociopath. I think he has no empathy. I think he's brilliant and talented, like many sociopaths, and they're calculating. They learn how to fit in and blend.
And based on the evidence, which included a lot of disturbing searches found on Dan's computer, the prevailing theory is that the big reason Dan killed Jessie was just to satisfy a sick urge.
I think she was a convenient target. He knew where she was going to be. He knew there wasn't going to be a family in the house. I think he wanted to kill someone and she was available.
And if cops hadn't caught Dan when they did,
You think he was going to kill again?
I believe there's a possibility that he would have tried it again.
What's the time span between the attack in the park and the killing of Jessie?
3 days.
at trial, prosecutors bring up all these points and more. Daniel Bartelt is found guilty.
I think Dan's a bad, bad person. He's where he should be.
But that's what everyone else says about him. Now that he's been found guilty, what would Dan have to say for himself? Would he finally confess?
Buck, Joy, I can't give you the answers that you're looking for.
Guess not.
When he started by saying, Buck and Joy, I wish I could give you the answers you're looking for. We knew it wasn't going to go in a good direction.
This jumpsuit that I'm wearing, these shackles that I'm put in, don't make me guilty.
No, it was the mountain of evidence that made him guilty. And yet, like an actor delivering his final monologue in a play, Dan prattles on.
I can't prove that I'm innocent to anyone, not even myself. I can't prove that a sun that I haven't seen for over 400 days still even rises and sets, but I like to believe that it does. The only reason that I went to trial at all is because I was told I would not be allowed to acknowledge that I couldn't refute the evidence and just accept sentencing without saying that I'd done something I hadn't.
Basically said, there is this evidence, but no, I didn't kill her?
He said some weird things.
Weird things like this.
I'm suffering now more than I ever have before.
And this.
Judge Martins, I pity you.
But in the end, the one thing Dan didn't say,
my conscience is clear.
He didn't acknowledge what he did, and let alone apologize to Joy and to me and to Jessie and to everybody. He continued to deny what he did.
Daniel Bartelt is sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Anger, hatred, rage. Any normal parent of a murdered child might be feeling all of these things. But when it was Jessie's father's turn to speak in court, he turned to his daughter's killer and said this.
I forgive you, as I have every single day since we found out it was you. I believe there's good and bad in every one of us, so I don't demonize or vilify you.
You showed a lot of grace and kindness and love in your statement.
I don't want you to think that I'm living in some sugar-coated bubble and I don't have pain or anger at all. At the same time, stronger than that was this inexplainable peace and forgiveness and a sense that everything is okay. And I don't know how to explain that to this day.
Because he's seen the impact his forgiveness has had on others, he's decided to honor his daughter's memory by starting an organization called the Love is Greater Than Hate Project.
It's a nonprofit, and our dual mission is to end violence against our girls and women and to have all people inspired, educated, and motivated to choose love over hate.
It's how Jessie would have wanted it, he says, what she lived for and what she wrote about in the music that lives on after her death.
But that's just me. With this I feel free.
Don't get me wrong, I'll never be okay with what Dan did to Jessie. But Jessie's life and death, for me, are for bringing light into this world.
Singing this song for you.
My life's getting better and better all the time. Love is greater than hate.
Then when you die, it's